PASTI, Partnership to Strengthen Transparency for Core Innovation, is an initiative undertaken by the Ministry of the Environment Japan, MOEJ, to facilitate climate change mitigation measures through supporting climate action transparency in developing countries. In Japan, increasing transparency on the private sector's greenhouse gas, GHG emissions, by introducing a measurement and reporting system has helped raise awareness among businesses to reduce their emissions while developing their capacities to manage GHGs in their business activities. In this context, transparency means to disclose GHG emissions with quantifying. Since the major part of countries' GHG emissions stems from economic activities of the private sector, many developed countries have set up systems in which private sector entities are mandated to measure and report their own GHG emissions. This is also the case with Japan. Shedding a light on the extent of GHG emissions is the first step towards highlighting and then implementing emissions reductions. Through increased awareness of emitting private sector entities, the response by policymakers have been to provide an enabling business environment for them to strengthen their efforts. Driven by the nationally determined contributions, NDCs, under the Paris Agreement, some developing countries have also started to introduce this system. This video introduces an overview of the Japanese government's GHG accounting, reporting and disclosure system and the Tokyo Metropolitan Government's Global Warming Countermeasure Report System as reference examples, as well as experiences of private sector entities that actually report their emissions. In Japan, the mandatory greenhouse gas accounting and reporting system based on Act and Promotion of Global Warming Countermeasures was established in 2006 as a GHG reporting mechanism for entities. This system obliges entities that emit a certain amount or more of GHGs to calculate their GHG emissions and report them to the government, and the government to disclose the data. In this system, all GHGs under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement are covered. Methods are stipulated in the government and ministerial ordinances for measuring emissions of 7 types of greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, CO2, methane, CH4, nitrous oxide, N2O, hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, perfluorocarbons, PFCs, sulfur hexafluoride, SF6, and nitrogen trifluoride, NF3, for a wide range of business activities. The process of measuring emission is divided into 4 steps. First, identification of emissions activities. Second, measurement of emissions for each activity. Third, measurement of total emissions for each type of GHG. And finally, conversion into CO2 equivalents. The CO2 equivalent emissions amount by GHG type must be reported. In May 2022, the government of Japan introduced an online reporting system, making reporting easier for business operators. Under the reporting system introduced by the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, results of reported GHG emissions are analyzed and used for feedback to report entities, including advice on updating technologies and retrofitting facilities. These strategic efforts have led to a large carve down of emissions in Tokyo area. Now let us think about the significance of the reporting system from the standpoints of 3 representative stakeholders: governments, the private sector, and financial institutions or investors. First, for governments, GHG emissions reports can be a powerful tool for capturing a more accurate picture of domestic GHG emissions. To reduce GHG emissions by the private sector, it is fundamental that each entity first measures and understands the amount of GHGs emitted by its own activities. Next, as for the private sector, they can revisit the amount of energy consumption and raw materials used by reviewing how GHG emissions occur. With such information, private sector companies may consider how to reduce costs through energy efficiency and improving production processes. Furthermore, companies often disclose GHG emissions in their integrated reports. In response to the recent trend towards carbon disclosure expected by their business partners in the supply chain. Also, GHG emissions are increasingly emphasized by trading companies and investors as one of the criteria for evaluating corporate value. GHG information disclosed by entities is becoming more and more important for financial institutions and investors. Data reported by companies can be used as a certain index for making decisions on ESG investments, etc. Responses to climate change risks of investee companies can be an important reference on top of the business profitability for financial institutions and investors. Since companies are expected to take a more sensible response to climate change risks, financial institutions may sometimes see disclosed GHG information is a critical index for their investment. At this point, we will explore cases of how the reporting system functions in greater detail. Here, let us introduce an example from the Ministry of the Environment, Japan.
Japan introduced a mandatory GHG accounting and reporting system and act on promoting global warming countermeasures. Any entities that emit more than 3,000 tons CO2 equivalent are subject to reporting. As of August 2022, this system covers approximately 13,000 business entities. Mandatory accounting and reporting system has evolved over time from the enactment in 2006. So for example, from May 2022, we introduced a new electronic reporting system which we call EEGS or EGUS. EGUS is a one-stop system from report preparation to submission under three different statutes, namely the Energy Conservation Act, the Act on Global Warming Countermeasures, and the F-gas Fluorocarbons Act. With this system, business entities can comply with their obligations more easily all at once, while we, the government, are also able to collect, compile, and utilize the data more easily, so that we provide digestible information for business operators. Using these data, we expect businesses to find more opportunities of their mitigation actions, including supply chain management. We further plan to develop EEGS to cover voluntary reporting. With these efforts, we will create more opportunities for decarbonization actions by business entities.
Next, there will be an introduction of what is happening at ASICS of Manufacture Company.
ASICS was founded in 1949 with the purpose of contributing to nurture, youth, and the development of society through sports. Today, about 80% of our sales are from outside Japan. Our founding philosophy, Anima sana in corpore sano, a sound mind in a sound body, express our desire for people around the world to live healthy both physically and mentally. In order to achieve this, one of our biggest challenges is to achieve sound earth which we can play sports. ASICS was the first sporting goods company who has set the greenhouse gas reduction target by 2030, officially approved by the Science Based Target Initiative. We are committed to be net zero by 2050 and have set ambitious targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from our one and supply chain operation by 63%. We believe it is our responsibility to work with our partners to reduce carbon footprint throughout the value chain. More than 90% of our total CO2 emission comes from Scope 3, mainly contributed from suppliers' production in Southeast Asia. We actively work with a strategic supplier to upload resource usage data, such as electric power and natural gas, into our emission data management system. Ensure accurate data is the first step, and with the cooperation from our supplier, we are able to benchmark performance and discuss about reduction measures together. To ensure the implementation of Scope 3 emission reduction is effective, we encourage our supplier to align with our target to maintain Earth's temperature rise within 1.5 degrees and shift to renewable energy. We have continuous conversation with the suppliers to understand their situation and the challenge and support them where necessary. As a result of our collective action, together we have successfully reduced Scope 3 emission by 20% compared with 2015. We are seeing more and more suppliers taking action, shifting to renewable energy in Southeast Asia. We will continue to collaborate with our stakeholders and take action toward net zero in order to have more resilient supply chain and enable people to enjoy sports on a healthy planet.
CDP is a not-for-profit charity that runs the global disclosure system for investors, companies, cities, states, and regions to manage their environmental impacts. It provides a carbon disclosure protocol for companies to follow for GHG measurement.
Disclosing greenhouse gas emissions is part of a longer and larger climate disclosure process. It is the first step. As part of that, you have to identify the risks and opportunities that your entity currently faces. That means that when you have done so, you increase your reputation in terms of credibility. 74% of entities have reported that they believe their reputation has increased following disclosure. That means that you have a competitive edge, taking note that requests for disclosure of greenhouse gases come from over 680 financial institutions that have over $130 trillion in assets. They also come from over 200 large procurers controlling over 5.5 trillion annually in procurement costs. This also means that all of this data is going to be used by sustainability raters and assessors, such as Bloomberg, such as the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, to mention just a few. Finally, it enters you in a cycle. The more you disclose, starting from greenhouse gases, the more you advance in your journey. 38% of first-year reporters have a target and a transition journey in place, a strategy to achieve it. By the third year, that number is 69%. And this leads to the final point. Regulation is increasing around climate disclosure. Inevitably, the burden is going to grow. Those that disclose stay ahead of that cycle of regulation increase and reduce the cost of doing so. Since the year 2000, when we were founded, every year has seen an increased and exponential growth in the number of responses. In 2021, over 13,000 corporate entities responded to CDP, over 1,000 cities, states, and regions, approximately 400 financial service institutions have responded to us. This means approximately 2/3 of the global market capitalization have responded through CDP. I think the short answer is absolutely yes. We've seen the US with the SEC proposed rule, we have seen the EU with the ESRS standards, we see China now going into a third consultation, we see India initializing voluntary regulations that will become mandatory, and we see the ISSB, which is associated with global standards. They are all based on one thing, however, on the recommendations and the pillars of the TCFD. CDP has aligned with those principles since 2018 because we firmly believe that whether they become the law in every single jurisdiction or whether it is just the market seeking to harmonize the globe entire in every jurisdiction is either going to be upheld by mandatory disclosure regulations or going to adhere to those that come from without.
In the international community, efforts towards a decarbonized society have been accelerated more and more from here on. In that international trend, transparency is a very important initiative to promote action. We need to work positively from the standpoint of each stakeholder towards the realization of a decarbonized society. The MOEJ, as well as cooperating companies and organizations,